In this discussion, we will consider different coaching styles and strategies and explore how schools can utilize coaching to improve and develop their professional development strategies. We'll also be discussing the benefits of coaching and that it can offer to teachers and staff in schools, and how you can adopt coaching methods in your everyday practices as a leader. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by our guests today. And if we can start with some introductions, that would be great. So Christian, do you want to kick off with a sort of 10-15-second introduction of yourself?
Yes, certainly. My name's Christian Barkay. I'm the principal of St. George's International School in Luxembourg. We currently have around 870 students. We're a full school from sort of age 3 to 18. And before I came here 10 years ago, I was the head of the British International School in Jakarta. And before that, I was the head of the secondary school in Shanghai, in Yuchong, so obviously part of Fabisia, working closely with Tom Olmert. And before that, I worked with in the state grammar school system in the UK.
Brilliant, thanks, Christian. Rebecca, you're next on the tile there.
Okay, my name is Rebecca Finley, and I am late into international education. Actually, I taught in the UK for the first 20 years and was a head in the UK in an independent school before moving to the Netherlands for my first international experience to the British school. And then more recently, over the past 4 years, I've been the head of primary at the International School at Park City in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
Brilliant, thanks, Rebecca. And Matt, next.
Hi, folks. So I'm Matt Hall. I'm the director of Making Stuff Better. And we say we create regenerative spaces for school leaders, which is a fancy way of saying we do coaching. And we specialize in coaching and coach training in schools. So we currently coach around about 280 international school leads, and we run coach training programs in kind of more than 10 international schools around the world.
Brilliant. And finally, Craig.
Hi, Max. Thank you. And Craig Considine, I'm CEO of Tangland Trust School in Singapore. Large school, 2,800 students, and again, all the way through. Previously, headmaster of Millfield School in the UK. And before that, head of Wanganui Collegiate School in New Zealand. But I'm very quick to try and not clip a vowel because I am Australian, went there from Geelong Grammar School and a range of other independent schools in Australia.
Fantastic. Thanks, Craig. Yeah, great to have you guys on the call. Really excited about this conversation. And so I think, it'd be great to just dive straight into it, really. So first question being, what do we mean by coaching? And perhaps what does coaching, or what does the word coaching mean to you in your individual contexts? Who'd like to kick off with that one?
Look, I think the coaching journey for all of us will be very different, I'm sure. And we've got experts in the room. I don't count myself as an expert, but I certainly have been looking to facilitate very positive outcomes based on that coaching paradigm. For me, I've seen it very much as a great way of questioning how I do things. And so I have my external coach, and I've probably always been very results focused, looking down the track somewhat, and probably didn't spend enough time looking at how I was going about things and the impact that was having on various groups of colleagues, broader groups like parents and students. So it gave me a great opportunity to stop and reflect on my own practice, looking at the here and now rather than getting too focused about what's coming down the track. And that's really been my little bit of input around how coaching has worked for me, I suppose.
Yes, I would add, Craig, I think that's a very valuable point. I think one of the problems with school leaders that you talk to, that I work with, certainly in my region, in Europe, but also previously in Asia, was that quite often if you said you were undergoing external coaching, that you were undertaking external coaching, that was somehow seen as a criticism, that there was somehow something wrong, or that there was something negative about how you were leading your school or managing your school, and that coaching was somehow offered as a solution to a particular challenging situation. Whereas in actual fact, it shouldn't be like that at all. It should really be an ongoing process. And certainly the dialogue that I have with my own coach outside of the school is really helpful for me, because it allows me to talk with someone completely independent of the school, completely independent of the governing body, and it gives you an opportunity to run ideas, to start a dialogue, to start an ongoing process of improvement, of self-improvement.
Absolutely.
I would agree there, and I think that the culture and actually the perception of coaching, there's a real shift. I'm seeing, particularly with our younger members of staff coming through, it's not seen so much as something that you take on board if you have a weakness these days. And I think it's seen as, maybe it's the success of sports and things like that, where people can see those incremental gains that you can get. They might only be small, but they have an impact. They have an impact on your performance, but also, of course, on student outcomes, which is what we're all looking for at the end of the day. So I think that I've seen a change, and it's a far more commonly and openly spoken about service within school, which I'm really pleased to see. But I would say, and perhaps we'll pick this up later, that I see more of an instructional coach method happening within school, and then sort of the true coaching, if you like, happening outside of school with staff. And for myself, I also have gone through coaching, not because there was something that I directly wanted to achieve, but more that I felt that I had needed the space to reflect and to consider the way that I lead, and the way that I can have an impact on those around me. So I think it's an interesting concept when you look at the two alongside each other, because I think they take you in very different directions.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I often think of coaching, and I spend a lot of time, unlike colleagues, it's almost the only thing I think about, whereas I know these three have lots of other things to think about. And it changes for me all the time, but I think the best way of defining it, thinking of it, is as an epistemology. It's a theory of knowledge, and it's knowledge created through conversation. That's my best stab at it today. It's the process of engaging in a particular type of dialogue that creates new learning, primarily for the client, the person being coached, but almost always, in my experience, for the coach. And that might be learning about leadership, it might be learning about self, it might be learning about classroom practice, but at its core, it's the how do you have a very specific type of conversation that creates new learning in the process.
And a couple of you mentioned that you have some external coaches as well that help guide and have that as a soundboard. Is implementing a more wider coaching strategy something that each of you have thought about using, or have used in your own school settings at all?
Are you looking for something we individually have done, or more systemically?
Yeah, I think a bit of both. I think you personally, but also thinking about more widely across your leadership team and teaching staff is looking to develop a coaching or culture of coaching, something that you've thought about. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I suppose given that Matt, who's here, has just been at Tanglin, there is a pretty strong emphasis on creation of a coaching culture. That comes from a number of our leaders who are very focused on that as a way forward. And so we have, and Matt sees a lot of these programs happening in different places, but certainly there is a culture of coaching at Tanglin. We would have upwards of 30 people qualified as coaches. We spent quite a bit of money with a small number of people about 3 years ago and their role, you know, their own professional development in doing that was going to be followed up by a series of programs where they would teach and coach others to take on other staff that they would then coach. And so I think we're in our 5th cohort of that. So we're probably close to 40 and upwards now. And so that's been really amazing. And I think that's really becoming the underpinning of a number of different things about how we take things forward with our teachers from a line management perspective. And maybe I'll come to that in a moment. But, you know, so that coaching culture has been established very strongly at Tanglin. And I think we're now looking to build on that in different ways. And maybe we'll come back to that later.
I think that's the dream, Craig, isn't it? What you described there is a fantastic setup there. And I think that having that many staff, and I know you're a big school, but having that many staff able to facilitate and not just coach others, but also train others to be coaches, I think it's a fantastic model, one that I think many schools would be very envious of. I think for us, it's more about, I would give an example. It's that it's happening almost organically for us at my school, and it's not happening necessarily in the same way, and not maybe as purposefully. It's about professional dialogue for us, the creation of a culture of openness, open-minded, and willingness to talk to each other, and peer coaching, which seems to be happening sort of how it's grown over time. I give an illustration of, I was in a staff inset last week where 2 teachers were leading on some reflective marking, responsive marking and feedback that we're doing. And I was sat at the back of the room thinking, oh, well, I haven't contributed to this, and I you know, I'm not standing up there, or I'm not involved in leading anything here. And I started to feel a little bit insecure for a few moments, thinking, oh, I'm one of those people who doesn't get involved, you know. And then I suddenly realized, no, it's happened. Suddenly people are able to stand up and lead this and take the lead and share what they have with confidence through a number of conversations, through growing people's professional development, and through, now it's not me standing at the front anymore. There's many other people who are very capable and very knowledgeable to do so, and I can sit back and enjoy and learn from them. And I think originally, when I first started at this school, I was at the front all the time, and, you know, got bored of my own voice. And it's great to see that it's happening, like I say, organically and informally, as opposed to a formal coaching model. But I would absolutely love to learn more about having a formal coaching model, because I can really see the benefits of it. And I'd be interested to hear how that works.
Just it's quite an interesting point there, Rebecca, about sort of it developing organically. How do you think that may have come to pass? Is it just teachers reading about it and learning about it in their own time, and then sort of bringing it to school, or how do you think that might have been fostered?
I think I would say it's early adopters. It's about when we've brought a new initiative in, or we've read about something that's current or really good best practice. I've looked for the early adopters, the people who are reading about things or interested in trialing in things, taking risks in the classroom, and I've gone to them and worked with them on that. And I think that has just spread. Don't get me wrong, I've been here for 4 years. It's not been an overnight thing. And with COVID in the middle, it's taken its time. But picking out those people who are willing to go and give it a try, and then they've had the opportunity to share their knowledge, has spurred others on who also are interested in developing in that way. And I would say that's how it's happened. And it's almost happened without me even consciously knowing it was happening, until the point where we have a number of staff that are doing that. But I also think some careful recruitment as well. I've been looking specifically for people who are that way inclined, and maybe who bring that sort of experience and expertise with them as well.
Amazing. And Craig, you mentioned that you're doing an incredible job at instilling that sort of coaching culture across your school. It'd be great to sort of hear about maybe some of those strategies that you've used to implement this. Yeah, it'd be great to hear a bit more around that.
Yeah, sure. Look, there's no doubt we all know teachers are time poor, and you've got to ensure that whatever you're going to put in front of them is quality. And in order to do that, we're very fortunate. We have a strong foundation that supports a lot of the work that we do with teachers. And that foundation funded a lot of those initial forays into coaching and the initial training. But subsequently, things have sort of dovetailed into our approach to performance management, a little as Rebecca was saying, looking at morphing away from the old-fashioned appraisal. I think we all know appraisal's probably never been particularly effective in my view, unless we're ticking boxes and keeping people happy that way. We don't want to do that. And so we've gone through a restructure around performance management, a really close look at competencies, and coaching has been somewhere in the middle of all of that. And they've all come together very nicely to be able to say, okay, we want to have these professional and rich conversations among colleagues. And sometimes people are a little bit reticent and a bit shy about that. And that's where the culture has been able to cut through some of that. And so we've now had our coaches work with line managers. The line managers have those performance management conversations, but they take slightly different forms, don't they? I think Rebecca expressed there, those really rich conversations between professionals about practice and trying to draw out better performance, as opposed to something summative at the end that says you've been a great teacher and this is where we are. And trying to help people work through understanding where they're at in their career, how they can focus on pedagogy, that how word again, and understanding how effective they've been. And that has worked really particularly well at this point. But we're in that phase of, okay, line managers are now undertaking that process. But we've got to create some time because we're asking people to have another conversation here in the process of teaching and learning and how they're going to be better. So we've got to find some time to do that. So there's another cost there in terms of a human cost because someone's got to cover lessons to allow that to happen. And as Rebecca said, we're a big school and potentially we've got a little bit more resource and opportunity to do that. And I know how hard it can be in smaller schools to be able to make those things happen. So, we live in a pretty good position and that will continue to develop. But I think the coaching by itself is good, but moving it in the right direction around performance management and professional dialogue in a not in a high stakes way. We're trying to keep it as a professional conversation. And, as we know in international schools, you'll always come round to the contract renewal. But all these things will be feeding in, those multiple glances that are taking place, those multiple conversations that are taking place are all feeding into something that allows for a more grown-up and real conversation with colleagues about how they're progressing from a management perspective. But you've got to engage people in the middle there somewhere, because I agree with Rebecca, either you end up just with, okay, it's professional conversations inside, it's personal conversations outside. Well, I don't think it has to be. I think if you can get the right approach happening, that can work very positively and dovetail together internally.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about maybe some of these more tangible outcomes in your respective schools, and maybe Matt, from your experience that you've seen schools successfully, adopting a coaching culture. What have been maybe some? Can you speak to some of those tangible outcomes that you've seen, perhaps, Matt? If you,
I think my starting point with this, or our starting point, is always I'm always slightly cautious, and I feel like I'm being a pedant when I say this, but I'm always slightly cautious because schools will come to us and say, we want to grow a coaching culture. And I'm a bit like, do you? And I suspect this is probably true in Rebecca and Craig's case, or do you want a culture that uses coaching and brings coaching on board as one way in which you move your school forward. And I think sometimes, there is a bit of a wave of coaching moving through international schools at the moment, and the temptation is to see it as a bit of a panacea. Of course it's not, and I'm not suggesting that's what Craig or Rebecca are saying, but there's lots of other types of conversations and processes that you have to implement as school leaders that are very far removed, unfortunately, very far removed when they need to be from a coaching style. So my starting point is always like, what are the priorities of the school? What do you want to develop? And then how might coaching support that? And the beauty of coaching and developing coaching is that it's just multifaceted. So when you talk about outcomes, the outcomes really are broad. So you can bring coaching in. I can be really specific. If you bring coaching in as a methodology by which you want to improve the way in which people are having line management conversations and make them far more meaningful, far lower stakes, far less outcome driven, you will get that. But what you'll also get in doing that is greater capacity amongst your middle leaders, for example, because in learning how to coach and learning to coach each other, they will inevitably be, they will be able to create more space for quality thinking, planning, strategic thinking. Even by the process of learning how to coach, that comes, let alone being coached. Likewise, we've worked with schools where they said this is really about pastoral, and we want our pastoral team. And again, you may introduce coaching as a way to improve the way in which your pastoral team is having conversations with students. But in doing so, you will inevitably improve the way that they have conversations with parents, because they just bring a very different approach to it. So I think one of the big advantages of coaching, which is not as true for other kind of school-based professional development, is you get a whole load of like really quality byproducts. Another one I can think of is often schools will come to us and say, we just really need to develop our middle leaders and we want to do coaching. And my pushback is, well, do coaching then and you will develop your middle leaders. So often a school I can think of as an example of where middle leaders were coming to SL too much. There was a real kind of I need the level above me to save me culture, and actually just training that, saying we're going to put coaching training in and we're going to focus on a particular area, meant that you got suddenly those leaders feel like they've got more capacity and they don't need to be going to the level above them as regularly. So you're able to kind of push the decision making in the agency down the school, which again is a good thing, but and achieves its objective, but it also gives that senior leadership team more capacity. So I sometimes say, it's the kind of ripple effect, isn't it? You kind of put it in somewhere with good intent. You can be really intentional about the impact you want it to have, but done well, it will have repercussions that you maybe can't even predict or measure, which is why I find it a really enjoyable and valuable thing to spend our time doing. But I always say the only thing, and it's not the only way. I think schools need to be really clear about the culture that they want to develop first, and then think about how coaching fits, rather than saying if we do coaching then everything will be great. to simplify very probably more than I should.
I'd say what you're saying there as well about coaching it's just one strategy, isn't it? And I think that I've noticed that we use the word, but people use the word coaching to describe things that aren't coaching as well. And there's mentoring, of course, and also direct conversation and a range of different strategies that you can employ. And I remember going to a session some years ago, research ed session, and Dr. Becky Allen was speaking about, she'd done some research into teachers' characteristics, and she'd kind of divided them into two categories of saying teachers are often rule followers or perfectionists, or a bit of both. And she talked about how those characteristics have an impact on not just our performance, but how we view our performance. And if you're a rule follower, then you do what you're told. And those type of people potentially benefit more from mentoring sometimes, because they come to me and say, don't ask me what I think, Rebecca, just tell me what you need to do and I'll go and do it, and I'll go and do it really well for you. But I don't want to sit down and talk to you about it. Whereas there's other people that will say to me, I want to do this really well. Help me find a solution. Help me think it through, and can you guide me, but not tell me the answer. And I think there's a certain EQ that leaders need to have when you're working with staff who can be quite diverse in their needs, to recognize what they need at that moment, and that some people will need guidance and mentoring or direct instruction, and at other times they need coaching, and you have to pick those moments quite carefully. And so having that broad range of strategies, which I learn all the time, and I learn it most from, like you say, watching others, I find is a really powerful tool, and hopefully has an impact on people going forward.
Yeah. And Christian, so we were just discussing, looking at some of the tangible outcomes around coaching in instilling a coaching culture in your school. And Christian, is coaching something that you've sort of thought about instilling across your team and your staff at your school as well?
I think there's two challenges really. Historically, we've seen that one of the difficulties is that because I have so many, I draw staff from over 20 different nationalities. The majority are British trained, but I have Europeans, I have Americans, I have Australians, and in that respect, their approach to the idea of coaching, it can be quite different according to their previous educational experiences. So I have at the moment 4 additional staff who are receiving external coaching. But we deliberately set out to offer it to colleagues as a sort of bonus, a benefit, rather than you're not doing very well, your communication within your team isn't going well, so you need to have external coaching. We said, as part of your own professional development programs, you can apply for external coaching if you want, as one of your elements of professional development. And so far, it seems to have worked really well. It's been very positive. People have taken it on board. I think it's a relatively new thing for us in terms of the institution, but it's been relatively successful because it's allowed people to be able to step back out of the day-to-day operation of the school, and we've also allowed, within certain parameters, we've also allowed those colleagues to find their own coaches. So we haven't simply said, choose that particular company or that particular coach, or we've said, okay, as long as they're clear about what they want to talk about and what areas they want to develop, we've given them a fair amount of autonomy in choosing a company or a colleague to talk with.
Yeah, interesting. And with regards to sort of giving them those options, is that something that you would collate to yourselves, or do you allow them to sort of just go off and find any individual or coach that might work for them? How has that sort of selection process been for you guys?
That's tended to be positive. We've tended to be quite open about that. Sorry.
Yeah. Brilliant. And Craig, with regards to some of those tangible outcomes that you mentioned that you have within your school at Tango Trust, could you speak to some of those sort of maybe tangible outcomes that have come from instilling that wider coaching culture? Oh, I think you're on mute there, Craig.
Apologies. One of the things I didn't mention before was one of the areas we've seen really positive feedback has been around allocating coaches to those that return from maternity leave or extended illness. and their reintegration back into school life, and the challenges that come with that, whether it's being a young mother, young father, a person who's had a long time off work. On the surface they can look like they're doing okay, but just giving them the opportunity to talk to somebody else, and we generally do that with somebody outside the school, or we encourage that, but some of them use some of our internal coaches, and that's probably been one of the ones that hasn't taken us by surprise, but we've been really positive and pleased about that, and the people that have undertaken that have really reflected positively on how it's helped them set themselves up. I think one of the other things, because I do think we've got now a culture around this, one of the things Christian sort of mentioned it, but people from different backgrounds definitely look at this very differently. I can argue male and female often will look at this a little bit differently, as generalizations, I mean. But we also have a number of our coaches who are in our business support team. And sometimes we don't talk about them. We focus on the teachers. But in fact, if we are a community of people and we're trying to engage everyone and offer a broad range of experiences and development, we felt it was really important to, I'll use Rebecca's term, some early adopters, those who are really keen to make this work from the business support team. And so some of our biggest champions are within that group, and they give some really nice opportunities and outcomes for our business colleagues who possibly weren't, if I'm really being honest, weren't in our first thought pattern around all of this. But it's really great that they've come on board and done that, as with some of our TLAs and STLAs, who sometimes, because of a cultural perspective, can be very quiet about the way they go about things, very effective, very capable people, but don't put their heads up sometimes. And I think we've seen a growing confidence in some of them because they've had somebody that they've been able to share with and talk about these sorts of issues with. So, yeah, I think there's some really tangible things that we've seen happen.
Brilliant. And just now touching on some of the limitations or perhaps challenges that each of you have faced in sort of adopting a coaching culture. Could you speak to some of those? Maybe Christian, starting with yourself, some of those challenges that you may have faced, and maybe how you've overcome those challenges as well.
Well, I think I think one of the challenges in a high performing school, in any high performing school, is the fact that the benefit and the value of coaching has to be clear to people, and they have to see that as something that they have to really, you have to embrace it and see it as a positive. You can't simply see it as something that's imposed on you, or you're told to do this by your superior or by the school. So that element of being self-aware enough to be able to say, I am going to benefit from this, my organization will benefit from this, my team will benefit from this. That's really important to make sure that that's inculcated within the organization, and that people are aware and are happy to buy into that concept. Because if you don't, then the danger is that individuals, colleagues, see it as simply another imposition by HR, for example, or by their heads of school. So it has to be something that's that people see as in common, really. And in that respect, what's been helpful for us is that I've, from my own perspective, talked about having an outside coach with colleagues in the school. And I've shared with colleagues why I've felt it's been very helpful for me and what tangible benefits have come from it as well. So that's a sense of saying, you're opening yourself up to vulnerability, in a sense, to say, the principal or the heads of school, the business manager, senior leaders in the school across different areas of the school have all benefited from, you know, individual external coaching. So this isn't something that's something that you only undertake if there's an issue. You know, you undertake it because it makes you a better colleague, it makes you a better teacher, it makes you a better head of faculty, you know, a better head of year, makes you a better head teacher.
Great, Rebecca. Any insights there around the potential challenges that you faced?
Well, I certainly agree with Christian that it really helps if the staff that you're working with want to be coached. And I think enforced coaching can be tricky, because in my experience, sometimes the people that I've felt would benefit from coaching are the least likely to want to be coached, and may not recognize or have that ability to open up to that. And the way that I would kind of work with that is to be very open about my own experiences and be very open about my own learning journey and share that quite transparently. So to encourage those who maybe would really benefit from it, but are reticent or don't recognize the areas in which they could use coaching to improve. So I think that also tallies with the fact that coaching is you don't see the results immediately. So you can't just invest what could be a lot of money, and as Craig said earlier, a lot of time, and you don't get immediate results. The results are long term, and they often grow and build, you know, each time you go through it, you maybe become better or more confident in the area, but those impacts might not be seen for a long time. And so you've got twofold in me. The challenges are those that you want to be coached who don't see the benefit because it's a long-term impact, but also when you're looking at the money and the financial commitment that you need to make to coaching, and the time that creates taking out teachers out of classrooms and things like that, you have to also convince those who are paying for it. And that also is something that they say, well, what are we going to get for this quite big investment? And so being able to articulate that isn't easy. And as Matt said earlier, you don't know what you're going to get out of it. You've got to be really, really clear about what you want to achieve. And it can be the people that are holding the purse strings or paying for it may have one direction that you want to go in, and the teachers may have a different direction. And it's about finding that balance. And for me, it always comes back down to student outcomes and what's going to benefit the students, because ultimately most teachers are fantastic natural coaches. They do it every day in their classrooms and probably don't realize that they're employing so many of these coaching techniques themselves in the classroom every day with the students. So to be able to step out and take on board that learning yourself is not always easy for everybody. So I would say for me, they are probably the biggest challenges, but not barriers that can't be overcome.
Greg,
I think, can I would add, I've had a number of conversations with people who simply say everyone in the school should be coached. And I actually don't buy that. I agree with what Rebecca's saying. People feel differentially around those things. And I see the coaching as one of the strategies, one of the elements in the toolbox that go towards making those really fantastic professionals. And some people definitely have a different spin on all of that. And you've got to respect that. And I think for me, the people that we talk about, the coaches, the middle managers, those who develop a sense of helping people work through various issues, will do that. We all know when we're talking to one of the coaches and you only listen to their questions and you sit there going, oh, hang on, what are you saying to me here? You're trying to send me down a pathway. And that's good. It's good to have that, as you say, self-awareness, Christian, I think. But for some of our staff, modeling their fantastic work in whether it's action research, whether it's more formal research, that's what they're going to do to improve those student outcomes. and to model fantastic behaviours for a range of people. You know, we don't mandate that everyone's got to do an NPQ qualification. Yeah, we encourage them, it's there. If they want to develop, that's fantastic. But again, when you bring it back to that performance management, we will have a range of people who want to do different things, and coaching will be fantastic for many of them. And that then becomes part of that professional dialogue where their friend, as Rebecca said before, you know, it might be mentoring, it might be much more direct instruction around where they need to go. And that's a bit of an age and stage thing in the career path. So I think there's so many areas. We just have to be careful not to say, I think you said it earlier, Matt, you know, the panacea for all things in the teaching world is coaching. Well, no, it's not. It's a great tool. It's a great thing to use. Let's keep the balance.
Yeah. And Matt, just around some of those overcoming some challenges, do you have any sort of tips around that?
So the one challenge in particular is that internal external challenge. You know, to what extent are we building and growing coaches internally to support others internally, and to what extent and when is it right to use external coaches? And I think that's different for different schools, but it sounds like there's a blended model in Rebecca and Christian and Craig's school. Certainly Christian and Craig, there's in some contexts going external is right, because there's things that people working in a particular role or a particular level don't want to share internally. And then for other processes, it's really right to build capacity within, which is far more economical and far more sustainable culturally. I think one thing we haven't really touched upon, which is something that we're really trying to address front on as a company, is the role of diversity, equality and inclusion in coaching. Charmaine Roche did a really good piece of research with Henley Business School a couple of years ago now, around some of the structural issues with coaching as a white Western methodology, with lots of hidden kind of structural implications that someone like me can't even see. And so as a business, we're working with a partnership that makes sure that they're looking at all of our coach training and how we approach this to try and address that. And I think linked to that, and it kind of comes to my point before, I think the other challenge is ensuring that any coaching that happens, it also is aware of the system. And we run a qualification called International Ed Coach, where we train people to coach in international schools. And part of the modules we've developed in that is around diversity, equality, inclusion, justice, awareness. When you are coaching, to what extent are you aware of that? But B, the second part of that, which is fairly new because this is new to us, is around systemic coaching. You know, to be crude, don't tell the African American lady who's applied for promotion 5 times that she's got everything she needs within her own resource to be able to move up through the system, when it's very evident that there's something about the system that is preventing her progress. And I think when coaching is boiled down to, it's just, you know, you just need to manifest, or you just need to tap into your internal resource and everything will be wonderful, which some coaching models kind of advocate. I think that's really problematic. And I think that training people to ensure that they're coaching with a kind of real common sense, real world head on is really important. Because when we're talking about schools, like any systems, we are talking about a really big international school system. There's a wider system that people are working within, and not coaching with that in mind, I think is problematic. I think and a lot of coach training is all about just deal with the person in front of you and what they bring, and that's what we used to do, and we've kind of had our eyes open to it a bit, that actually that's a bit simplistic and a bit naive, and our coaches need to really think about the system that people are operating in and coach them in relationship to that system. And that is a challenge, and I'm not going to sit here pretending that we've solved it. Just as a business, we're starting to really incorporate that into what we teach and also into the coaches that we use. So I guess, yeah, that's one that we're working through at the moment, but it's a bit of a watch this space.
So I think just sort of rounding up and thinking about the future of coaching in your individual school context, it'd be great if each of you could maybe touch on where you see it heading. Maybe a bit about obviously where it is now, we've discussed a lot about, but where you envisage that could potentially go. It'd be great to hear your sort of final thoughts on that. I don't know who would like to try that one. Christian, do you want to take that one?
Yes, no problem. I think the advantage with having a positive attitude towards the availability of coaching, alongside some other elements of professional development and personal development, is that allows for difficult conversations to take place in school at an earlier point, rather than waiting for the need to intervene formally. So you build up a culture of trust, of openness, of an ability, a willingness to share difficulties and challenges, but also you have a sense of being able to share positive outcomes, successes with colleagues and other faculties, other year groups, and across the school as a whole. So if you encourage and you positively engage with a culture of coaching, in a sense of positive reinforcement and engagement, that actually allows a school to develop a more open culture, and a very much a collaborative culture within the teaching staff, but also within the administrative and support staff. It's not just about your teachers, your TAs, it's about your business managers, it's about your office staff, it's about your receptionists. How do your receptionists greet your students, greet your staff, greet your parents in the morning? And if that positivity, that sort of constructive approach can be spread around the whole school environment, then the approach to coaching becomes more positive, and they'll see that as something that they can take on board if they need to, if they want to, and if they don't need to, they don't feel that they're going to benefit from it, then they don't need to take it on board. But it's always useful to have it as a background, a backup, as an option for people to take on board.
Yeah. Rebecca, what about yourself?
So I think it was Sam Sims said something along the lines of coaching being like the best evidence form of CPD, and I think we're seeing that particularly with our younger members of staff who are maybe earlier in their careers. Coaching is a word that they're coming through with and they're talking about openly, not just being coached, but actually wanting to train as coaches or become a coach, an instructional coach in themselves, and be able to have that sort of string to their bow, if you like. They see, and I see coaching going in a way that it's going to be a really desirable skill in a teacher, in a leader, to have that, whether you're a certified coach or an instructional coach, or having experience of just coaching strategies and coaching conversations, I think is going to be really powerful. I hope that we don't see it becoming something that is enforced, but also I hope that we don't see it something that becomes a bit like the growth mindset did, where everybody suddenly has posters on their walls and, oh, we're doing growth mindset because we've put a poster on the wall. I hope that coaching doesn't become that we're all coaches in our school. It's got to keep that integrity. And I think if it can keep that integrity, then performance can only improve. And if we, as educators and as educational leaders, it's so easy to jump on a bandwagon and off we go. And yes, we've ticked that box and we've done that. And I think we need to be cautious. We need to be very self-aware of all these brilliant things that coaching can bring, but do it properly and with intentionally. And if we can do that, and if we can use our young staff who are keen to model it and to develop further and to show some of the impacts we can have, I think that coaching's here to stay.
Craig,
I like that. Yeah,
yeah.
I like that word, integrity. I think that's spot on. But in my mind, very brief, conversations create caring communities. And at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. And all our pastoral work is all about that, engaging, in that case, young people. I think for us as colleagues, it's always about the dialogue and the conversation. And as long as, you know, the old Stephen Covey, seek first to understand, it's not a bad way to begin, and probably not a bad way to end either. Yeah, I think that's really important, and I see that as where we're going.
Fantastic. That's a great way to sort of round up the conversation. Matt, any other final thoughts about a school, you know, that's wanting to really embed this in a sustainable way, coaching culture? Any final thoughts there?
I think it just comes down to you know, one of the things that we've always been on a bit of a professionalize this process. You know, we've talked about lots of different types of coaching, lots of different experiences of it. You know, coaching is an unregulated industry. Any of us can be coaches in anything tomorrow if we want to be. Create a website off you go. I think the more that schools use it, the more opportunity there is to really ensure that it's being used, it's being done properly. And again, that's part of our businesses, kind of it's part of what we offer, crudely. So, you know, we say all of our coaches are very experienced, well trained, up to date, well supervised, and that's an important thing. But actually, our ambition as a business, in the way that we support international schools, is to continue to develop a qualification that is recognised within the international school sector as an international qualification. So my personal ambition and the company's is that in not many years' time, you know, international heads will be able to recruit and see that people have got that qualification, understand its quality, understand what it means, in the way that we do with lots and lots of other things that we'd be looking for when we're appointing people. And I don't think it's going away. I think it's only going to grow in its use. And I think as we move into kind of continued uncharted territory in the world, you know, it feels so unpredictable that having a methodology that allows us to deal with something in the moment and create really positive conversations with whatever's happening is going to become more and more relevant. I feel like we're learning as we move through time that we know far less than we think, and we certainly don't have the answers in the way that we maybe thought we used to. So it's shifting to a really professional quality place in school as part of a professional development suite with other qualifications that have credibility and weight, I think is going to be really important. And that's where we see it going. And we're trying to keep up.
Fantastic. Awesome. Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you so much, guys, for your time, and fascinating to hear all your journeys individually and you know with your school as well with regards to sort of adopting that coaching culture and the massive benefits that having you know coaching can provide. So once again, thank you so much for your time, and yeah, maybe look forward to doing a part 2 session perhaps in the coming months. But yeah, thank you, guys.